tax on our sons and daughters, which would be the result of our failure to appreciate the enormity of the budget crisis that we face. I think it's perfectly understandable that this process is taking longer than usual, given both the size of, or the magnitude of the challenge to the Florida economy, coupled with the complexity of the stimulus. When you throw in the fact that you have a tremendous shortfall combined with very short-term amounts of money from the federal government that only last 2 years, it definitely makes the decision about how to approach the budget process more complex.
Those are some of the same concerns President Atwater laid out back in December. Is there any reason to believe that the budget that he's put together over there several months later wouldn't satisfy Moody's?
Well, I would say this. The fact that Moody's confirmed the gravity of a potential downgrade in our bond rating yesterday confirms his very accurate belief that we've got to think of that as part of the approach we take to this budget. And one of the factors cited by Moody's in the potential bond downgrade is a failure to maintain adequate reserves. And what that means is, essentially, we need to take the approach that the Speaker articulated. We need both ample revenues as well as sufficient reductions so that we carry a reserve forward, fend off the downgrade in the bond rating, and avoid something that would cost Floridians and really the next generation billions of dollars at the time.
I guess my question is there reason to believe that the Senate's proposal for reserves is inadequate?
I would say that we believe that the House approach to bringing the two budgets together is the right thing to do. You have a House approach focused mainly on reductions, sweeps, redirects, and a Senate approach focused mainly on taxes and gaming and revenue increases. And really, I think the direction the Speaker articulated is the absolute right way to go, the statesman-like thing to do, and really the right way to deal with the current crisis, which is rather than the House fight the Senate on their revenues and the Senate fight the House on their cuts, we got to be mature leaders and embrace each other's approach. And if we do that, we will have not only done what a lot of folks suspect we won't do, which is taken the long view. We will potentially stave off the downgrade in our bond rating, and simultaneously respond to the hangover of the stimulus when it flames out next year.
Okay, but isn't there enough reason to believe that a unanimous vote in the Senate to pass the gaming package, to pass the cigarette tax hike, was specifically to avoid drastic cuts to higher education?
I don't know why the Senate votes how they vote. I believe that the business of the Senate is the Senate's business. Clearly, if you're going to take the approach that the Speaker has identified as the right approach, and frankly which the world financial markets would, the Moody's report would validate is the right approach, we need to work together. People expect us to work together, and neither chamber should be about trying to get an advantage over the other or trying to push the other one around. Each chamber should attempt to embrace the necessary parts of the other's approach. We have fewer revenues, they have fewer cuts. If we're going to merge those two approaches, that's the responsible thing to do.
Representative, what is the fact that you've got Democrats here listening in, clearly eager to hear something about the budget? What does that say about the process here, the openness and the amount of information that's come out so far?
I'm proud of what Speaker Creedle has done, which is rather than try and take a House position in confidence or not articulate the goal, he stood up there on the dais and said it. And what he said is, we think that we need both and are willing to entertain nearly all of the Senate's revenues, provided they're willing to entertain nearly all of our reductions. And I think that shows a very high-minded approach to how to solve this like leaders, how to go about this not as combatants but as partners, and we expect our friends in the Senate to join us in that approach.
How many times did you talk to J.D. Alexander today?
I haven't talked to him at all today.
You have House and Senate offers going back and forth, in some ways reminiscent of what happened openly in budget conferences. Why not bring that process, especially at this point, out into the public view? I mean,
because here's the key distinction. We're trying to agree on essentially three numbers that you must agree on before you can actually come up with a budget in tandem. You have to agree how much total revenue you have, broken out by recurring and non-recurring, and then you have to agree how much your total appropriations are, how much you're going to spend, and then that determines what your total GR balance, that reserve that Moody's said was so important. In order to come up with those numbers, you've got to decide what approach to take and how much total new revenues you will take into account and how much total expenditures or reductions in expenditures you do. That's all we've been trying to talk about. We're not talking about individual allocations among individual committees. Until we come up with those numbers, we can't. Now,
why not come up with those numbers out of the open at this point? I mean, why not just have those discussions?
Well, because we're not to that point yet. Until you agree how much total revenue you're going to have to spend, and how much total allocations and how much appropriation you're going to spend out of it, and how much balance you're going to have left, you can't even begin that dialogue. And that's why, again, because of both the severity and the complexity of this unique budget year, it's taking longer than we otherwise would expect.
The Senate leadership keeps talking about their concerns about higher ed cuts. I mean, Senator Alexander, Senator Atwater both have said that.
Yeah.
Is that not an allocation question?
No, I don't know why they are talking about individual allocations, because the House has never suggested or even required any particular reduction or revenue. What we've said, and said very plainly, is we're willing to embrace nearly all of the Senate's revenues as long as they're willing to embrace nearly all of our reductions. Where and how and from which column those come is we're not to that point yet. Until we decide the total amount we're going to spend, the total revenue we're going to agree we have, the total amount we're going to spend from that, and the resulting balance to carry forward to avoid the potential downgrade in our bond rating, those conversations aren't happening.
These offers going back and forth do not have any specific numbers on higher ed, universities, community colleges?
They have different scenarios that you would score different things with. But the purpose of that, again, is to come up with a combined total of recurring general revenue, non-recurring general revenue, and a total amount of expenditures to figure out what your GR balance is. So while they do contain hypothetical assumptions about how much revenue you might generate, the House has been very clear. We haven't insisted on any specific cut, and it would be absolutely wrong to say that we are asking for a cut in any area, whether it be higher education or the Transportation Trust Fund.
But if you don't make those cuts in higher education, they would have to come from somewhere. If you're talking about the House level of reductions,
that's what we're talking about.
It includes that higher education reduction, whether you take it out of higher education or not.
Well, but you could also take it out of, again, transportation, economic development. You could take it out of different areas. And that's why we've been very clear and very open in the approach. I thought it was, again, a bold step the Speaker took to say, hey, rather than fight each other and have we will resist their revenues and they will resist our reductions, we're going to be statesmen. And we're going to take the long view and say, you know what, we'll embrace nearly all of your revenues. Tell us how we would need to slightly modify those to get this done. And we would ask you to be our partner and embrace nearly all of our reductions. And the math says if you do it that way, that helps stave off the bond rating downgrade, that literally would be an economic challenge that I think has been referred to as a tax on our sons and daughters, caused by our failure to deal with the gravity of the situation that we now face. We're trying to deal with the gravity of that situation in a mature fashion.
Are you making progress with the Senate in having this dialogue, or is this a pronouncement from on high up here? What tangible is happening that we can't see that shows progress?
Conversations continue to go back and forth about what's the total recurring general revenue, the total non-recurring general revenue, and the GR balance that we want to have left over. But no hard and fast numbers have been agreed to. And as I said, we have the problem of both the enormity of the budget shortfall and the complexity of the stimulus flameout next year, that we've got to take that into account. The stimulus burnout is tantamount to an economic hurricane that we know hits in the summer of 2010. We know it's coming. We know it costs over $1 billion. If we don't prepare for it, we would be irresponsible.
How seriously is the House leadership about this idea of imposing a fee or a tax on the non-settlement tobacco companies as a substitute for not taxing the cigar industry?
I would say we're not insistent on anything at this point other than the basic approach, which is the responsible way to deal with this budget crisis. That is totally an option that will be decided, I would imagine, much later. But we're trying to get to, do we deal with this like others, or do we not work together?
Has offshore
A couple of senators.
has offshore drilling been part of these budget negotiations?
Not at all. I got to go. See you guys.